Yeah, I think stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. You know,
Deep inside the silent, frost-touched hallways of Clarence House, there exists a door that no one has dared to open for more than 2 decades. Behind it rests a chamber belonging to Camilla, sealed away, shielded from every curious gaze, and hidden even from the man who lies beside her each night. Then, through a twist of fate that no one could have predicted, that very key ended up in the hands of Prince William. What he discovered when he finally stepped inside was so much more than an empty room. It was an entire buried chapter of painful, shameful history. A past deeply tangled with the memory of his mother, Princess Diana, full of secrets that had never seen daylight, never reached a journalist's page, never been whispered in public, yet carrying enough weight to shake the entire foundation of the monarchy and redirect the course of royal history forever. Inside those walls were not gowns or royal keepsakes. What William found were pieces of evidence so damning that they forced him to make a choice no son should ever have to face, whether to bring those hidden truths into the open and confront head-on the woman he believed had systematically destroyed his mother's life. Camilla. Camilla, once the despised outsider who clawed her way from the shadows into the most powerful seat in the land, now stands at the very edge of ruin. She understands that William holds something capable of dismantling everything she has spent her life constructing, and so, from the darkness, she begins to scheme, devising cold, calculated moves to guard her crown at whatever cost. But William will not back down. In that one decisive moment, he launched a battle that no royal had ever been bold enough to begin, a legal war against the palace establishment itself, a confrontation that threatens to pull back the curtain Camilla has kept tightly drawn for 30 years. What truly lies within that forbidden room, and could the evidence hidden inside be powerful enough to permanently erase the royal title she sacrificed everything to claim? Toward the final days of August 2025, Clarence House, the grand royal residence that once belonged to the late Queen Mother and now serves as the official home of King Charles III and Queen Camilla, was alive with the noise of renovation. Workers had been brought in to address long-neglected damage in the building's eastern wing. Floorboards had grown weak with age, plaster had begun crumbling from walls, and decorative cornicing had faded beyond recognition. Dust drifted through shafts of pale morning light, and yet there was a collective energy among the workers, a quiet pride in restoring this piece of British heritage. But in the middle of all this activity, one particular space remained completely untouched: Camilla's private dressing room, a chamber that had been locked and abandoned for over 20 years, sat at the far end of the eastern corridor like a forgotten wound. Its heavy oak door, reinforced by an iron lock of an older era, radiated an atmosphere of deliberate concealment. Not even King Charles, despite his devoted bond with Camilla, had ever set foot inside it. That room is hers alone, he had reportedly told members of the palace staff, in a tone that mixed reverence with unmistakable unease, as if he preferred not to pursue the question further. Among the household staff and long-serving members of the royal team, quiet rumors had circulated for years. Perhaps the room preserved relics from Camilla's hidden life, from the years when she existed in the shadows as Charles's secret companion, while his marriage to Princess Diana deteriorated in grief and humiliation. Was it truly just a private wardrobe space, storing gowns and jewelry no longer needed? Or was it something far more troubling, a concealed archive of uncomfortable truths that powerful people needed to keep buried? One particularly warm afternoon, a construction foreman named Thomas, a man with over 30 years in the trade and a reputation for thoroughness, was removing a wide decorative mirror from the hallway wall near the sealed room. As he lifted the mirror away from its position, he caught a faint mechanical click beneath his fingers. He paused, looked closely, and discovered a small recessed cavity hidden behind the wooden wall paneling. Nestled inside the hollow was an aged brass key, its surface engraved with 2 letters, CS. Camilla Shand, her maiden name, the name she carried before marriage transformed her identity. His heart rate climbed, not from alarm, but from an instinct that told him this was no ordinary find. "This is something significant," Thomas murmured quietly to himself, holding the key steady in his palm as though fearful it might somehow vanish. He immediately reported the discovery to the project supervisor, a calm and deliberate man named Edward, widely respected for his composed judgment and silver-streaked hair. "I believe this may open that sealed room," he told him, barely concealing his excitement. Edward recognized at once how delicate the situation was and refused to act independently. He escalated the matter through the proper chain, and word eventually reached Prince William, who had been appointed to oversee the restoration project as part of his growing responsibilities in preserving the royal estate. At the moment the call arrived, William was at Kensington Palace, spending the late afternoon with his 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, while Catherine prepared the evening meal in the kitchen below. Edward's voice trembled slightly as he explained what had been found. "Your Royal Highness, a key has been recovered. It bears the initials CS. We strongly believe it unlocks Queen Camilla's private dressing room." William went very still. He gripped the phone firmly as a flood of memories rushed through him. Images of his mother, Princess Diana, and the suffering she had endured. The stories of betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak tied to Camilla's presence in their lives. "Do not allow anything to be moved or disturbed," William instructed, his voice controlled but carrying unmistakable weight. "I will be there shortly." As he rose from his seat, Catherine read the tension on his face immediately and asked gently what had happened. "It concerns Mum," he told her simply. "I need to go." And with that, he left. Later that night, beneath a London sky thick with low clouds, William drove to Clarence House without company. Camilla was away in Scotland, fulfilling a series of charity commitments connected to wildlife preservation, a carefully managed part of her public image. King Charles was settled at Balmoral, enjoying the solitude of the Scottish countryside. The residence stood almost completely empty, watched over by a small, rotating team of security officers. William made his way down the dim corridor toward the sealed room. The old brass key rested in his palm, and the silence around him felt heavy and alive. Standing before the oak door, he reached out and touched the lock. A strange stillness came over him. Not the fear of danger, but something older and more personal, the weight of what might be waiting on the other side. "If this room carries answers about what my mother endured, then I have to be strong enough to face them," he told himself quietly. But he did not open the door that night. Instead, he pocketed the key carefully, stepped back, and allowed himself time to prepare. He understood this was not merely a locked room in a royal building. It was a possible doorway into truths that had been deliberately buried. Truths connected to Diana's life, her suffering, and her death. Standing there in the stillness, a deep resolve formed inside him. Whatever lay behind that door, he would face it, for his mother, for his wife, and for his children. What he could not have known in that moment was how completely the contents of that room would change him, and how violently it would disturb the carefully maintained peace of the British monarchy. Several sleepless nights later, at the very start of September 2025, Prince William returned to Clarence House, alone and without telling Catherine where he was going. She had offered repeatedly to come with him, her worry evident in every word. "You don't have to carry this by yourself," she had told him, but he was firm. "This is something I owe Mum. I need to face it with a clear head." Camilla, still in Scotland and cycling through one scheduled engagement after another, had by now been alerted by a trusted aide that renovation work at Clarence House was progressing rapidly through the Eastern Wing. The message triggered immediate alarm. She had been careful, so careful for so many years, and now the proximity of strangers to that sealed room unsettled her deeply. "Stay up there for now. Don't come back to London yet," she told her closest personal assistant, Marcus, through a heavily encrypted phone line, her voice betraying the anxiety she rarely let anyone see. To avoid suspicion, Camilla stretched her Scottish itinerary deliberately, adding extra charity appearances, accepting invitations to regional events, even agreeing to a local television interview to promote conservation causes she had long championed. Every move was calculated to give her an airtight alibi if anything unexpected surfaced. What she had not anticipated was that the key to her hidden room had already been placed in William's hands. William chose a night of driving rain to return to Clarence House. The storm gave him perfect cover, the noise of the weather concealing the sound of his arrival, and the darkness emptying the grounds of unnecessary movement. He drove without a driver, parked away from the main entrance, and made his way through the eastern wing as quietly as possible. The renovation area was deserted at night. A skeleton security team patrolled elsewhere. He stood before the oak door for a long moment, key in hand. Then he unlocked it, pushed it open, and stepped inside. Using only the light from his phone, William scanned the room and stopped breathing.
This was no dressing room, no wardrobe space, no private sanctuary for a woman's personal belongings. What he was looking at was a meticulously maintained secret archive. Rows of steel filing cabinets lined one wall, dust-covered wooden trunks were arranged carefully along another, and at the center of the room, positioned beneath a glass display case, sat a pearl necklace he recognized instantly, one of Princess Diana's most iconic pieces of jewelry, believed missing since the chaos following her funeral in 1997, an item the royal household had never been able to account for, an item that for 28 years had simply ceased to exist. "How is this possible?" William whispered, pressing his fingers against the glass. "She kept it here, all this time." The grief hit him first, then the fury, slow building, absolute and cold. In the center of the room, an old wooden chest bore the initials D.S., Diana Spencer. William crouched before it, lifted the lid, and found something no one had ever been permitted to see: a collection of his mother's personal letters, written in Diana's unmistakable handwriting, graceful even in anguish. Some letters were addressed to Charles, and they were devastating in their honesty. "You made your choice, and it was not me, not our family. Every single day I feel myself disappearing." Others were written to William and Harry, tender and maternal, but shadowed by fear. "My darling boys, I am afraid that one day the truth will simply be buried, and you will be left to face alone the people who caused all of this pain." And then came the letters written directly to Camilla, raw, unguarded, furious. "You may believe you have taken my place, but you are nothing more than a shadow in the life you stole, and the world will eventually understand what you truly are." Then William found a sealed envelope. Written on the front, in Diana's hand, were 4 words: "For William, when ready." His fingers shook as he opened it. The letter inside began, "My dearest William, if you are reading this, then what I always feared has come true. Camilla will never stop. She is driven by something deeper than ambition, a need to possess, to control, and to erase. She forced me to stay silent by threatening the safety of you and your brother. I love you beyond all words. I trust you to be strong enough to carry this." William slid to the floor. Tears fell freely, and he made no effort to stop them. The grief of loss, the crushing weight of a truth kept from him for decades, and the helpless regret of a son who could not protect his mother, it all crashed over him at once. "She knew," he whispered to the silence. "She knew everything, and they made sure no one ever heard her." But the letters were not all. Beneath them, William found a legal document, a non-disclosure agreement dated August 15, 1997, just 12 days before Diana was killed in a Paris tunnel. The document demanded her absolute silence regarding the nature of Charles and Camilla's relationship, and in exchange offered guarantees concerning her continued access to her sons and her protection from certain legal consequences. The terms were ruthless. If Diana spoke publicly, she risked losing William and Harry entirely, along with facing the full weight of the palace's legal machinery. "They used us," William said quietly, his voice barely above a breath. "They used us as weapons against her." And still there was more. A small USB drive, tucked beneath the papers, containing privately recorded footage of intimate moments between Charles and Camilla, evidence Diana apparently gathered for her own protection before it was taken from her and hidden here. Attached to the drive with a paperclip was a handwritten note. The words were Diana's. "This is the truth they will not let me speak." William left Clarence House that night with the most critical documents secured inside his coat. He felt like a different person than the man who had arrived. Back at Kensington Palace, long after midnight, he sat alone in his private study and read his mother's final letter again and again. Catherine found him there, his eyes raw and red. She asked nothing, only placed her hand on his shoulder. He pulled her close and held on. "I found the truth about Mum, about everything Camilla did, and now I have to protect our family from her." In that moment, a son's grief transformed into something larger and more unyielding, a mission, a reckoning. Beginning carefully and confidentially to reach out to legal advisors, people he trusted completely, to begin examining the authenticity and implications of the NDA and the recorded footage. He knew what it would cost to bring this forward. He knew it could break the monarchy into pieces, but he could not turn away from it. His mother had been silenced. He would not be. Not long after William departed Clarence House with the confidential materials tucked safely on his person, Camilla received word through her private network of aides. She was still in Scotland, moving through public events with a steady smile and careful composure, when a secured message arrived from a contact embedded within Clarence House security. The meaning was immediate and devastating. "He found all of it," she said in a low voice to Marcus, her most loyal aide, a man who had served her faithfully since the years when she existed entirely in Charles's shadow. Though she projected calm, her voice carried a tremor she rarely permitted. "We need to control the story before he tells it," she instructed Marcus. "Revive the old rumors about William and the aristocrat, the Hanbury story from years ago, but this time give it teeth. I want fabricated hotel records that look authentic. I want digitally altered photographs. I want fake private messages leaked through sources that cannot be traced back to us. Find the people who can do this cleanly and make sure there is no trail leading anywhere near this room." Her intention, she explained with chilling precision, was to target not William directly, but Camilla. If we can destabilize her emotionally, William will be forced to choose between protecting his marriage and pursuing this fight publicly. He will retreat to defend his family, exactly as Diana was pressured into retreating to protect her sons. She allowed herself the smallest of smiles. No woman, however composed, can watch accusations of her husband's infidelity flood the world's front pages, especially when the so-called evidence appears convincing. The public still remembers those whispers from 2019. We reignite them with new material, and the damage takes care of itself. She was confident that the tactic would work, but Camilla was not a woman who trusted a single strategy when more than one was available. She placed a call through an encrypted line to a second individual, a man named Victor, former royal security, experienced in operations that required total discretion and left no visible record. She gave him his instructions directly. He was to retrieve from Kensington Palace everything William had taken from Clarence House, the NDA, Diana's letters, and the USB drive. He was to do whatever was necessary to accomplish this before William could share the materials with anyone outside his immediate circle. Victor confirmed the assignment in the measured tones of someone for whom this was simply professional routine. He outlined his approach: disabling specific camera feeds, bypassing internal access controls, using a timed power disruption to reduce visibility. He would move at night, when exposure was minimal. Camilla ended the call and sat for a moment with her thoughts. She considered whether to bring Charles into this,
to use his deteriorating health as an emotional lever against William, persuading him that the public collapse of the monarchy would kill his father more certainly than any illness. She filed the idea away as a last resort. She then reached out quietly to several journalists she had cultivated over the years, seeding the early stage of the fabricated scandal. Start with anonymous whispers online, she advised one editor she trusted. Allow the tabloid circuit to amplify it naturally. By the time it lands on front pages, there will be enough fake evidence in circulation that fact-checkers will struggle to keep up. When the first traces of the story began appearing on social media hours later, Camilla felt the familiar sensation of control returning to her hands. The plan was working. William, she believed, would soon be too busy protecting his reputation to think about justice for his mother. But she could not have known how completely she had miscalculated. The story ignited at first like paper catching flame, a slow curl at the edges, then suddenly and completely consumed. Within 24 hours of Camilla's operation being set in motion, British newspapers erupted with banner headlines. Fresh evidence of a secret between William and a well-connected aristocrat, they screamed. Private images and intimate messages surfaced across anonymous social media accounts, constructed with enough technical sophistication to appear credible. Doctored photographs showing staged meetings, fabricated message exchanges dripping with manufactured intimacy. The content spread from Twitter to Instagram to international news wires within hours, and the public polarized instantly, half dismissing it as another orchestrated assault on the royal family, the other half consuming it eagerly. At Kensington Palace, Catherine was preparing the children's breakfast when she glanced at her phone and read the first headline. The shock was physical. Her hands began to shake. Her eyes filled immediately with tears she fought to hold back. The memories of 2019 returned with full force. The sleepless nights, the conversation she had tried to bury, the feeling of the ground shifting beneath a life she had worked so hard to build. This time felt crueler. The new fabricated material appeared convincing, and the cruelty of its timing, when she was already raw with anxiety over everything William had uncovered, made it almost unbearable. She sank onto the sofa and pressed her face into her hands, allowing herself a few minutes of private collapse, before gathering herself. She had 3 children she needed steady. She had a husband who needed her beside him. She would not let this consume her, but the hurt was real, and the humiliation cut deep. William received her call at his desk, heard the trembling in her voice, and left immediately. The moment he arrived home and saw her face, he took her hands. "Not a word of it is true," he told her, his voice tight with emotion and anger. "I have never been unfaithful to you. This is an attack, a deliberate, constructed attack, and I know exactly who is behind it." Catherine held on to him, crying, and though his reassurances began slowly to reach her, the damage had already sown a quiet distance between them, the kind that fear plants before truth has a chance to pull it out. Outside the palace walls, the story began affecting William in measurable ways. Polling confidence in him slipped. Commentators raised questions about his temperament and suitability. One prominent columnist asked publicly whether a man who could not manage his own private reputation could be trusted to lead a nation. William responded by assembling a team immediately: senior attorneys, cybersecurity professionals with intelligence backgrounds, and a handful of advisors he trusted without reservation. In an urgent closed meeting at Kensington Palace, he was direct. "I want to know who is responsible for this. Follow every thread, however thin." His team moved quickly, tracing metadata from the original leaked posts, reconstructing digital pathways, and connecting the operation to servers with known links to Marcus, Camilla's personal aide. The digital fingerprints once found were far less carefully obscured than their creators had believed. Simultaneously, William continued his legal preparations. He made secure copies of Diana's correspondence, had the 1997 agreement reviewed by 2 independent legal authorities, and arranged for the USB recording to be authenticated by a forensic technology specialist. "This isn't about my reputation alone," he told Catherine, who had by now steadied herself and stood beside him with quiet, burning resolve. "It's about finishing what Mum started. Camilla has stepped over every possible line. I will not walk away." William agreed to appear in a live national broadcast, sitting calmly, looking directly into the camera, and speaking to the country without notes. "What is being presented to the public is a manufactured smear built from fabricated materials by people who are afraid of their own history," he said. "I will not be intimidated. I will not retreat. The truth will come forward, and it will come forward soon." The broadcast shifted the public mood. Across social media and in polling data, his numbers began climbing again as people took notice of the steadiness in his voice and the quiet fury behind his eyes. But beneath the surface, the most dangerous moment of the entire confrontation was still approaching. Victor was already in motion. Several nights after the fabricated scandal had reached its full force across international media, Victor made his move. He had prepared with characteristic professionalism. In his early 50s, powerfully built, and accustomed to operating in environments where discovery meant the end of everything, Victor had spent years in roles adjacent to British intelligence services. He was familiar with the architecture of royal security. He understood its rhythms, its blind spots, and its predictable routines. Camilla's instructions, delivered during a clipped, tense phone exchange several days prior, were direct and unambiguous. Enter Kensington Palace, reach William's private study, recover the non-disclosure agreement, the personal correspondence, and the USB drive. Leave no trace, no fingerprint, no indication that the room had been entered. Failure was something she was not prepared to contemplate. Victor dressed entirely in black, equipped himself with electronic jamming tools, lock bypass instruments, and a compact device capable of interfering with selected sections of the palace's camera network without triggering alarms. He approached the building from the rear gardens on a cold, moonless night, using his knowledge of the grounds from earlier years working within royal security to navigate without hesitation. He moved through the dim corridors quietly, methodically, keeping to the paths where patrol rotations left brief windows of passage. Everything was unfolding precisely as planned. His breathing remained controlled, his pace remained steady. He was nearly at the study door. And then a small boy appeared in the hallway ahead of him. Prince George, 12 years old, half asleep and deeply unsettled by a nightmare he could not quite shake, had left his bedroom with an empty glass in his hand, heading for the kitchen and a drink of water to calm himself. The corridor was almost completely dark, lit only by the dim glow of small night lights set low near the floor. George took a few steps forward, rubbed his eyes, and froze. A tall shape in black stood very still ahead of him. "Who's there? Dad?" The boy's voice broke immediately with fear, high and thin in the silence. Victor stopped. For one fractured second, the entire plan fell apart in his mind. A child! He had not prepared for a child. He had not prepared for anything like this. In the chaos of that moment, with the certainty that the sound of George's voice would bring security rushing within seconds, Victor made the only calculation he could manage. He moved to get past the boy. George stumbled backwards as Victor pushed through, lost his balance, and fell. The side of his head struck the sharp wooden corner of an ornate antique table that had stood in that hallway for generations. Blood appeared immediately from the cut at his temple. "Mom, there's a man! Help!" George's scream tore through the silence of the entire wing. The alarm system activated instantly. Emergency lighting flooded the corridor in hard white brightness. Security personnel converged from 3 directions, voices sharp with urgency. Victor turned to run, covered perhaps 20 meters, and was brought down in seconds, overpowered, restrained, handcuffed on the floor while he was still catching his breath. Among the equipment found on him, professional lock bypass instruments, electronic tracking devices, signal interception tools, and a small glass vial containing a sedative compound. The evidence of his intentions was complete. William burst into the corridor moments later, wearing nothing but his nightclothes, his face white with shock. He took in the scene in an instant: the restrained intruder, the blood on the floor, and his son sitting against the wall with tears streaming from his face. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and gathered George into his arms. "You're safe. I have you. Nothing is going to happen to you." His voice was as steady as he could make it for the boy's sake, but his hands were shaking. George pressed his face into his father's shoulder. "I was so frightened, Dad. He came from nowhere." The palace physician arrived within 4 minutes and examined the wound carefully. The cut was superficial. It would require a small number of stitches, but carried no serious risk. Still, the sight of his son injured inside what should have been the safest place in the world sent a cold, absolute fury through William that settled into something permanent. Catherine arrived seconds later, taking in the scene with wide, horrified eyes before dropping beside George, pulling him close, and weeping into his hair. Over recent days, she had endured the manufactured public scandal against her marriage. She had survived it with discipline and grace. But this was beyond all of it. Her child bleeding in the corridor of their home because of what Camilla feared William might expose. William rose slowly from where he had been crouching beside his son, straightened to his full height, and looked at the man handcuffed on the floor. When he spoke, his voice was absolutely quiet. "She sent him into this house, into the room where my children sleep, to protect herself." He paused, and when he continued, there was nothing in his tone that resembled uncertainty. "She will answer for every part of this." Word of the break-in reached sympathetic media sources within hours, and public reaction was explosive. Headlines openly questioned Camilla's involvement. The hashtag #protecting the Wales family spread with stunning velocity across every major platform, and for the first time in her tenure, the Queen consort was being discussed not as a figure of authority or sympathetic reinvention, but as a threat, a villain in the story the entire world was now watching. In the days immediately following the failed intrusion at Kensington Palace, a grim, charged atmosphere settled over the royal household, like the air before a storm that refuses to break. William's legal and security teams, composed of experienced investigators and senior barristers, worked without rest to build the case that Victor's presence and equipment made undeniable. Victor was taken to a secure facility for formal questioning. He arrived composed, falling back on years of professional training, repeating a single, clean denial. He acted alone, had nothing further to say, and would not be elaborating. He held that line for hours, but the digital record his equipment carried told a different story. In a separate operations room, cybersecurity analysts methodically processed everything seized from Victor's person: an encrypted mobile device, geolocation data, deleted call logs reconstructed through forensic recovery. The analysis took less than 36 hours. The calls led to a device registered to Marcus. Financial transfers routed through a chain of offshore accounts pointed to the same man. Location records placed Victor and Marcus in the same place privately just days before the break-in. William received the full briefing in a closed session at Kensington Palace. The evidence was comprehensive. "This ties everything together," the lead digital analyst confirmed. "The manufactured media story, the fabricated photographs, the instructions to Victor. It all routes through Marcus and through him to her." William listened without interrupting. He looked once at George across the room, still wearing a small bandage at his temple, drawing at the kitchen table without a care in the world, then turned to his legal team and told them to bring in Marcus. The meeting took place in a quiet, monitored room within the palace, curtains drawn, security positioned at the door. Marcus entered looking hollowed out, pale, exhausted, clearly aware that the walls had already closed in. William sat across from him at a wide oak table and spoke calmly, without theatrics. "We have documentation connecting you
To you, the smear campaign, and to the man who entered my home while my children were sleeping. If you continue to withhold the truth, you will face charges that will define the rest of your life: defamation, criminal conspiracy, unlawful intrusion. Consider your answer carefully. Consider your family." Marcus attempted resistance. "I only carried out what I was told, sir. I didn't design any of it." His voice was thin. William leaned slightly forward. "Then tell us who designed it. Help us, and we will protect you. Deny it, and you will face all of this alone." The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. Then Marcus picked up the glass of water in front of him, drank, and set it down. His hands were trembling. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a murmur. "Everything came from Camilla, all of it. She ordered the affair story to be rebuilt with manufactured evidence, fake travel documentation, altered images, invented private messages, because she wanted to push Catherine to an emotional breaking point. She believed that if William had to defend his marriage publicly, he would abandon any plan to expose the documents." He paused, drew a breath, and continued. "She also authorized the Kensington Palace operation. Victor was sent specifically for the non-disclosure agreement, the letters, and the recording. She said that sometimes limited harm is acceptable in the defense of something larger." The room was completely silent. William absorbed each word. Marcus added one final detail, a phrase Camilla had used during their last encrypted conversation. She told him, "He has to be stopped before he opens this to the public, whatever it takes." The formal statement was recorded and witnessed by two independent legal observers. William thanked Marcus with quiet courtesy, stood, and left the room. In the hallway, he paused for a moment, eyes fixed in the middle distance. Then he called his lead attorney. "Begin formal proceedings. All of it." The charges assembled over the following days were wide in scope and carefully constructed. Unlawful retention of Princess Diana's private personal property, the letters, the jewelry, the recorded materials. Defamation through the deliberate and orchestrated fabrication of false evidence against both William and Catherine. Coercive conduct in connection with the oppressive 1997 agreement imposed upon Diana under duress, and direct criminal involvement in the attempted theft of evidence from a protected royal residence. His lead barrister, a senior advocate named Eleanor, delivered a clear summary during their final strategy session. Legally, the case is solid. The documentation is genuine, the forensic trail is clean, and we have a cooperating witness who was present throughout. But the public impact will be historic. This will reshape how the monarchy is perceived, possibly for a generation. William nodded without hesitation. This is not about settling a personal grievance. It is about ensuring that what was done to my mother is documented, acknowledged, and that the people responsible are held to account for her, for Catherine, for my children. He paused. I will not be the person who had the ability to do this and chose comfort instead. When the proceedings formally opened, they became instantaneously the most scrutinized court case in the modern history of the British monarchy. The High Court in London drew press from every major outlet in the world. Legal correspondence filled every public gallery seat. Representatives of aristocratic circles observed from the upper rows with carefully neutral expressions. News networks ran continuous coverage. Analysts debated every emerging detail in real time. Camilla arrived on the first morning dressed in a deep formal black, her posture rigid and her face arranged into a studied expression of composure. She held herself with the bearing of a woman who refused to appear rattled, but those close enough to watch her eyes during the early hours of testimony noted the tension she could not fully conceal. The way her gaze moved fractionally to the evidence being presented, the slight tightening of her jaw when the 1997 document was lifted from its folder.
Her legal representatives made their opening argument that the materials in question were historical and private, that their relevance to any present matter was a matter of interpretation, and that the proceedings represented a deeply inappropriate weaponization of grief. It was a competent argument. It simply had nothing adequate to say in response to what followed. The USB recording was shown to the court, sensitive sections handled in compliance with legal standards, and its authenticity was confirmed by a forensic technology panel. The 1997 non-disclosure agreement was read in its entirety by the court recorder, every clause and condition laid bare in a silent, airless room. Diana's personal letters were quoted at length, and when the prosecutor reached the sealed envelope, the letter addressed to William himself, and began reading the opening lines, a silence fell over the gallery that lasted for nearly a minute afterward. Several observers were visibly affected. Even certain members of the judiciary appeared moved in ways their professional training could not entirely conceal. Outside the courthouse, the public response was immediate and enormous. Under the banner of a shared phrase expressing solidarity with Diana's memory, millions of messages flooded every major social media platform, from the United Kingdom to North America to Australia to Southeast Asia. The outrage was not directed at the monarchy as an institution, but at one particular figure within it, and the expression of it was unified in a way rarely seen in public discourse. William sat among the plaintiffs and listened to every word. He allowed himself no distraction. This was the moment he had been preparing for, and beneath the grief that moved through him steadily as the evidence unfolded, he felt something else, a sense of duty fulfilled, a sense that his mother's voice, so long suppressed, was finally reaching the room it had been kept out of for nearly 3 decades. Then, at a moment no one had anticipated, King Charles made a direct intervention. A personal appeal was delivered to the court, and simultaneously, the king reached William by private telephone. His voice, when William answered, sounded older and more fragile than William had heard it before, worn by illness and by the weight of what was happening. "My son," he said quietly, "I am asking you, for the sake of this family and for the sake of what remains of my time, to stop this. We are still a family. Whatever has happened, we are still that." He also warned, gently but clearly, that continuing the legal action risked provoking a constitutional disorder that could destabilize the institution in ways that would take a generation to repair. "The crown has to survive beyond all of us," Charles said. William was silent for a long time on the other end of the line. He was angry, he was still grieving, and he loved his father. Imperfect, compromised, and flawed as their relationship had always been. He agreed to suspend the proceedings, but he named his condition clearly and without room for negotiation: a full, public apology from Camilla, delivered nationally, on record. The broadcast took place the following evening from Buckingham Palace. Camilla stood before the camera in formal dress and delivered her statement in measured, even language. She expressed regret for the pain caused to Princess Diana and to Diana's family. She accepted personal responsibility for retaining materials that were not hers and for decisions she acknowledged were wrong. The country watched in near complete silence. Then the reaction came. Commentators, journalists, public observers, and ordinary viewers across the political spectrum largely described the statement as inadequate, technically fulfilling the requirement while conveying almost nothing of genuine contrition. The words were correct, the feeling behind them was absent, and the public registered that absence immediately. Though Camilla retained her formal title, the effect on her standing was permanent. Her public appearances became significantly reduced. Her approval numbers reached historic lows that showed no sign of recovery. Quietly, a number of official duties she had previously held were redistributed without announcement. William, by contrast, emerged from the entire ordeal changed in a way that people around him described as a settling, as if something that had been unresolved in him for his entire adult life had finally been laid to rest. He returned to Kensington Palace, embraced Catherine, and held his children until the tension left his body. "You did the right thing," Catherine told him softly. "Your mum would be proud of you." George, his small bandage now removed, and his face carrying the untroubled expression of a child who has already moved on to the next adventure, told his father simply, "You were really brave, Dad." William laughed, the first full laugh anyone had heard from him in weeks. Clarence House, once a symbol of deliberate concealment, became something else in the months that followed. It became a reference point, a reminder, discussed in books and documentary features and university lectures on the monarchy, that even the most carefully engineered silence has a lifespan, that institutions built on the suppression of truth carry within them the eventual cost of that suppression, and that sometimes it takes one person with access to a long-lost key and the courage to use it to let that cost come due. Through William's refusal to look away, Diana's voice finally reached the ears it was always meant to find, and for the first time in 28 years, those who loved her most were able to grieve her fully, not only her death, but the life that had been made so much smaller and more painful than it should have ever been. Does Prince William's determination to defend his mother's memory inspire you? Does the story leave you wondering what other truths may still remain hidden behind the closed doors of the British monarchy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to stay with us, and click on the next video appearing on your screen right now. You won't want to miss it.